The moment Jane picked up the phone, I knew she was talking about me. I stood at the top of the stairs, listening as her voice turned sharp, her words clipped and fast. "She's being ungrateful," she hissed. "I do everything for her, and this is how she repays me, making me look bad in front of the social worker?" She paused, then let out a bitter laugh. I should have known she'd be trouble. My stomach twisted. I wanted to walk away, pretend I hadn't heard, but the truth was already settling deep in my bones. She had never cared about me, not really. I was just another paycheck to her, another case file to keep in line. And the worst part? I had let myself believe, even for a moment, that maybe this time would be different. I should have known better. The first time I walked into Jane's house, I knew something was off. It wasn't the house itself. It was clean, organized, even cozy in a staged sort of way, the kind of place that looked perfect for a visit from a social worker. But there was something in the air, something about the way Jane smiled at me with just a little too much effort, like she was already tired of pretending. It wasn't the same smile she gave the other girl in the house, May. With May, she was warm, familiar, like they shared an unspoken understanding. With me, it was polite but distant, as if she was tolerating me. At first, I tried to convince myself I was imagining things. I'd been bounced around the system enough to know that no placement was perfect. Jane didn't scream at me or hit me, and compared to some of the homes I'd been in, that was already an improvement. But over time, the little things piled up. The way she would forget to buy the snacks I liked, but always made sure May had her favorites. The way she would talk over me when the social worker came for a visit, answering questions meant for me before I had a chance to open my mouth. The way she never asked about my day, but always had time to listen to May talk about school, her friends, her plans for the future. It wasn't just neglect, it was something sharper. When May let me in on the truth, that Jane had shown her my personal file before I even arrived, asking for her opinion on me, I felt something harden inside me. I wasn't a person to Jane, I was a case, an obligation, something she had to deal with until I turned 18 and stopped being profitable. But she was smart. She never outright mistreated me in ways that could be easily reported. Instead, she chipped away at me in small, calculated ways. When I got sick with a chest infection, she barely acknowledged it. May's daughter, a sweet girl who visited on weekends, was the one who made me tea and checked on me. Jane ignored me completely, as if my illness was an inconvenience she didn't want to acknowledge. After days of barely getting out of bed, she finally asked if I wanted cough medicine. I told her no, not because I didn't need it, but because I knew she didn't actually care. I didn't want to give her the satisfaction of acting like she was doing me a favor. The final straw came on my birthday. It wasn't that I expected anything huge, but some acknowledgement would have been nice. She didn't say a word to me all morning, no card, no small gift, not even a happy birthday in passing. I tried to tell myself it didn't matter, but when May's birthday had come around, Jane had taken everyone to Nando's. She had planned the whole thing, made sure it was special. That day, as I sat in my room alone, the truth became impossible to ignore. I wasn't really part of this household. I was just there. That afternoon, she finally muttered a half-hearted happy birthday like she had just remembered and was only saying it out of obligation. When I brought up the difference in treatment between me and May in front of the social worker later that week, Jane had an excuse ready. "Oh, do you want to go out this weekend instead?" She smiled like she was being reasonable, like she was offering me a solution. I wanted to scream. Of course, now that someone else was watching, she was willing to make it right. But the moment the social worker left, she picked up the phone and started venting to her about everything I had said, twisting it to make herself look like the victim. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about being treated unfairly, it was about control. Jane wanted to be seen as the perfect foster carer, the generous woman who took in troubled kids and gave them a home. The second that image was threatened, she went on the defensive. I knew then that if I ever really tried to stand up to her, she wouldn't let it go, and that terrified me. After that day, something shifted. Jane wasn't outright hostile, but I could feel the difference in the way she spoke to me, the way she moved around the house. Before, she at least pretended to be polite, keeping up the image of the caring foster mother. Now she barely bothered. The change was subtle. Small cuts disguised as indifference, but it was enough to make my stomach twist every time I had to be in the same room as her. She didn't yell or punish me directly, that would have been too obvious, too easy to report. Instead, she ignored me completely, as if I didn't exist. If I spoke to her, she would take an extra second before responding, her voice clipped and disinterested. If May was around, Jane would shower her with attention, asking about her schoolwork, her friends, her plans for the weekend, then turn to me with a cold glance and say nothing. I wasn't part of the conversation, I wasn't part of anything. But the worst part was that, to the outside world, nothing seemed wrong. She still played the role when necessary. When the social worker called for a check-in, Jane's voice was suddenly warm and caring. "Oh, she's doing fine, we're working on some things, but you know how it is, teenagers." If I was in the room, she would flash me a forced smile, silently daring me to contradict her. I knew better than to speak up. Last time she had turned the entire situation around on me, making me seem like the problem. I needed proof, something concrete, something that couldn't be twisted against me. I started paying closer attention to the things she said, the way she acted when she thought no one was watching. That's when I noticed the way she talked about me to May. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but May confirmed it one evening when we were alone. "She tells me all the time that you're disrespectful," she admitted, looking uncomfortable. "She says, you act like this is your house, like you expect to be treated like family." That last part hit me harder than I expected. I had never said that out loud, but maybe I had wanted it. Maybe some part of me, despite everything, still hoped to belong somewhere. But Jane had made it clear, this wasn't my house, and I wasn't her family. I wasn't even a person to her. I was just another case file, another mouth to feed, until the check stopped coming. Hearing it from May made it real. It wasn't just something I felt, it was something Jane had actively decided about me. She had read my file before I even stepped into this house, judged me before she ever met me. I had never stood a chance. That realization burned in my chest, but it also made something inside me snap into place. If she was going to treat me like a problem, then I would become one. I started writing things down, every comment, every moment of neglect, every time she whispered something cruel just loud enough for me to hear. I noted the times she ignored me when I was sick, the moments she played favorites with May, the way she called me lazy when I tried to stay in my room to avoid her. It wasn't enough yet, but it was a start. Then, one evening, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Jane was on the phone in the living room, speaking in a hushed but frustrated voice. "She needs to go," she said. And for a second, I thought she meant May. But then she kept talking. "She's nothing but trouble, always trying to make me look bad. I don't need this stress." I froze, gripping the doorframe. She was talking about me. I shouldn't have been surprised, but hearing her say it out loud, hearing her admit that she was actively trying to get rid of me, sent a chill through my body. She wasn't just ignoring me out of annoyance. She was planning something. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. If Jane wanted me gone, she would find a way to make it happen. She could spin any story she wanted to the social worker and they would believe her. After all, she had been fostering for years. I was just another kid with nowhere to go. If I didn't do something soon, I would lose whatever little control I had left. I needed proof, real proof, something she couldn't deny, something I could use to make them listen. And I needed to get it before she found a way to get rid of me first. The day the social worker was scheduled to visit, Jane was in an unusually good mood. She hummed while she cleaned the kitchen, arranged a plate of cookies on the counter, and even asked May how her classes were going. It was all part of her routine, creating the perfect illusion of a warm, nurturing home. By the time the doorbell rang, she had already transformed into the version of herself that the system believed in. The caring foster mother, the dedicated guardian, it made me sick to watch. I sat on the couch as Jane welcomed the social worker, a woman named Karen who had been assigned to my case since I arrived. Karen was polite, professional, but distant. She asked Jane the usual questions, how things had been, if there were any concerns, how I was adjusting. Jane answered smoothly, slipping in just enough fake concern to make herself seem involved. "She's been a little withdrawn lately," she said, shaking her head with a sympathetic sigh. "Teenagers, you know how they are." I try to include her, but sometimes she just wants to be alone. I clenched my fists in my lap, biting my tongue. That was a lie. She didn't try to include me in anything. She barely acknowledged me unless there was an audience. Karen finally turned to me. "How have you been feeling? Are you comfortable here?" I looked at Jane, who was watching me carefully, her expression unreadable but expectant. I knew what she wanted. She wanted me to nod, to say everything was fine, to let her keep up the act. That's what I had done in the past. I had let her control the narrative, but this time I wasn't going to let it slide. "No," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I don't feel comfortable here at all." Karen blinked, slightly taken aback, but Jane barely hesitated. She let out a soft chuckle, shaking her head as if I had just said something silly. "Oh, honey, I know you've been feeling a little out of place, but—" "You ignore me," I interrupted, my voice sharper now. "You treat May like she's your actual kid and treat me like I'm just some unwanted guest. You talk about me behind my back, you complain that I'm a burden, and you don't even pretend to care unless someone else is watching." Jane's face stiffened, but she recovered quickly, turning to Karen with a forced, tired smile. "You see what I mean? She's been acting out lately. I think she's just feeling a little lost. It's not uncommon for foster kids to struggle with attachment issues." That was the moment I realized just how good Jane was at this. She had a ready-made excuse for everything. She knew exactly how to spin my words to make me look irrational, dramatic. I could already see Karen weighing both sides, trying to decide what to believe. I swallowed, forcing myself to stay calm. "She told May I was trouble before I even moved in," I continued, refusing to let Jane take control of the conversation. "She read my file and made up her mind about me before she even met me. She barely speaks to me unless it's to criticize something. When I was sick, she ignored me for days. The only reason she's acting nice now is because you're here." Karen frowned, scribbling something in her notes. "Jane, is this true?" Jane let out an exaggerated sigh. "I don't know what she's talking about. I've always treated her the same as May. If I ever asked May about her, it was only to make sure she felt comfortable here." She turned to me with a look of exaggerated patience. "I don't know why you feel this way, but I promise, I've never done anything to make you feel unwanted." I had expected this, but it still sent a jolt of frustration through me. She was so good at this, too good. She wasn't denying things outright. She was twisting them just enough to make them seem like misunderstandings. She was making me look paranoid, overly sensitive. I took a deep breath. "I heard you on the phone," I said finally, "a few nights ago. You said, 'She needs to go, she's nothing but trouble.' You were talking about me." Jane's expression flickered just for a second before she composed herself again. "I don't recall saying anything like that." "You did," I insisted. "I was standing right by the stairs." Karen looked between us, clearly unsure. Jane's performance had been too good, too polished. My word alone wasn't enough. I needed more. I pulled out my phone, my hands only slightly shaking as I tapped the screen and pressed play. I had recorded her. I had known Jane would never admit what she had said, so I had taken matters into my own hands. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough. Jane's voice came through the speaker, sharp and irritated. "She needs to go. She's nothing but trouble, always trying to make me look bad. I don't need this stress." Silence. I looked up to see Jane's face pale slightly before she schooled her features into something colder, tighter. But Karen had already heard it. I could see the shift in her expression, the way her professionalism cracked just a little. "Well," Karen said after a moment, her voice measured, "that's concerning." She turned to Jane, her gaze sharper now. "Is there something you'd like to explain?" Jane opened her mouth, then closed it. I could almost hear her brain working, trying to come up with an excuse. She wasn't used to being caught off guard. Finally, she let out a breath, shaking her head. "I was just venting. It's hard fostering teenagers. I would never actually do anything to hurt her." Karen's expression didn't change. She was still taking notes, but now the doubt in her eyes was gone. I had done it. I had cracked Jane's perfect facade. And now there was no way she could ever make me stay. The moment Karen left, the air in the house shifted. Jane didn't say anything right away. She just stood there, her face carefully blank, watching as the social worker's car disappeared down the street. I held my breath, waiting for the explosion, but it didn't come. Instead, she turned slowly and gave me a smile, calm, almost amused. "That was quite the performance," she said, her voice light, as if we were discussing a school play. I didn't respond. My hands were clenched at my sides, my body still wired from the confrontation. I had expected anger, yelling, maybe even some desperate attempt to deny what had just happened, but Jane didn't look defeated. She looked like she was already 10 steps ahead. "You must feel very proud of yourself," she continued, stepping closer, "standing up for yourself, making yourself look like the poor, mistreated little girl. I bet you think you've won." I swallowed, my throat dry. "I told the truth." She chuckled, shaking her head. "And what exactly do you think happens now? Do you think Karen is going to swoop in and rescue you? That she's going to take you away from here and put you somewhere better, somewhere safer?" She tilted her head, studying me like I was a child who didn't understand how the world worked. "You really don't get it, do you? You're nothing but a case number to them, a problem to manage. If they take you out of here, it won't be because they care about you, it'll be because they don't want to deal with the hassle. And where will they put you then?" I hated that she was getting to me, hated that the seed of doubt she was planting had already started to take root. Because she wasn't wrong. I had been through enough homes to know that the system didn't care about kids like me. Not really. If they moved me, it wouldn't be to protect me, it would be to protect themselves. But I couldn't let her see that doubt, couldn't let her know she was getting under my skin. "I don't care," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Anywhere is better than here." Jane's smile widened, but there was nothing kind about it. "We'll see about that." She didn't lash out at me that night. She didn't even raise her voice. Instead, she let the silence do the work. She moved through the house as if I wasn't there, as if I had already disappeared. May, usually so chatty, barely spoke to me. The tension was suffocating. It was a waiting game, and Jane wanted me to be the one to crack first. Then things started to change. Small things at first. My laundry wasn't done, even though Jane still did May's without complaint. The food portions at dinner became smaller for me, just enough to notice. One night, I came downstairs late to get a snack and found the fridge locked. I stared at it for a long moment, my stomach twisting, before quietly going back to my room. She wasn't punishing me in ways I could report. That was Jane's skill, knowing exactly where the line was and towing it just enough to make me miserable without giving Karen a clear reason to pull me out. She wanted me to suffer, but more than that, she wanted me to be the one to give up. Then came the real blow. A few days later, Karen called to check in, and Jane made sure to take the call in the kitchen, just loud enough for me to hear. "Oh, she's been doing so much better," she said, her voice warm and proud. "I really think our talk helped. She's been more respectful, more engaged. I think we've turned a corner." I stood frozen in the hallway, my nails digging into my palms. She was setting the stage, rewriting the story. If I tried to complain again, I'd just look like an angry, ungrateful kid. Jane had manipulated her way out of trouble before I'd even had a chance to react. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Jane was right about one thing. I wasn't safe here. Not really. She wouldn't hurt me physically, but she would break me down piece by piece until I either accepted my place or got kicked out on her terms. I had thought that getting Karen to listen was the hard part, but now I realized that had just been the beginning. Jane wasn't going to let me go without a fight, and if I wanted to win, I was going to have to play by her rules. Jane had won this round. I knew that the second I heard her on the phone with Karen, spinning the perfect story, erasing everything I had said, making sure my complaints sounded like nothing more than the emotional outburst of a difficult foster kid. She wasn't just covering her tracks. She was setting the stage for whatever came next. I had forced her hand, and now she was preparing to make her next move. If I stayed, I wouldn't just be miserable. I would be destroyed. I had to get out, but not on her terms. Not in a way that made it easy for her to say, "See, she was the problem all along." If I lashed out, if I ran away without a plan, she would get exactly what she wanted, a reason to paint me as unstable, a lost cause. No one would believe me then. No one would care. So I had to be smart. I had to find a way to leave that wouldn't just get me out, but would make sure Jane. I spent the next few days watching her, studying her patterns, looking for weak spots. Jane was careful, but she had blind spots, small gaps in her perfect control. She didn't lock up her home office where she kept paperwork and records. She didn't always mute her phone when she talked to the social workers. And, most importantly, she still trusted May. That was the key. May wasn't my friend, not really. But she wasn't my enemy either. She had been here longer. She knew how to survive in Jane's world, knew how to play along, but I had seen the hesitation in her eyes when I told Karen the truth. She knew I wasn't lying, and Jane might have been careful with me, but she had slipped up with May before. That was my way in. One afternoon, when Jane was out running errands, I knocked on May's door. She looked at me warily, her hand still on her laptop keyboard, ready to pretend she was too busy for this conversation. I didn't blame her. I wouldn't have wanted to get involved either. "I know you heard Jane on the phone the other night," I said, keeping my voice low. "I know you know she's lying." May hesitated, glancing toward the door, listening for Jane's return. I don't know what you're talking about," she muttered, but there was no conviction in it. I took a deep breath. "I'm leaving," I said. "I don't know where yet, but I'm getting out of here. And I need your help." That got her attention. She turned to look at me fully, studying my face. "You're serious?" "Completely." May sighed, closing her laptop. "And what exactly do you want from me?" "Proof." She frowned. "Proof of what?" "That Jane isn't who she says she is. That she's manipulating the system, treating us like paychecks instead of people. You've been here long enough to know, you've seen things, and I know she talks to you. She trusts you." May looked away, biting her lip. She was thinking about it. We both knew the risks. Jane wouldn't hurt her physically, but she could make life miserable in 1,000 other ways. She could make sure May had nowhere to go when she turned 18, could ruin any chance she had at support once she left foster care. But May also knew that Jane didn't care about her future, only about keeping up appearances while she was still useful. Finally, she exhaled. "I might have something," she admitted. "She talks about you all the time, complains that you're difficult, that you make her life harder, and a few months ago she said something about making sure you wouldn't be her problem for long." She hesitated. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, that's exactly what I need." May didn't have a recording, but she did have screenshots. Jane wasn't stupid enough to put things in writing where they could be used against her, but she had texted vague complaints to friends, talking about how she was counting down the days until I was gone, how she couldn't wait to be done with me. It wasn't enough on its own, but it was a start. The next step was finding out where I could go. I didn't have family, no one who would take me in, but there were options. Emergency housing for foster kids aging out of the system, programs that helped kids like me transition out before they ended up homeless. The problem was that Jane had control over all of that. She could make it impossible for me to access those resources if she wanted to, unless I forced her hand. I waited for the right moment. When Jane was in one of her fake good moods, I asked about my options after foster care, about what came next. She smiled, tilting her head in that way that made it clear she was enjoying this. "Oh, honey, I wouldn't worry about that yet. We have plenty of time to figure things out." That was what I needed. I called Karen the next morning and told her Jane was refusing to discuss my transition plan. That was a violation of the system's guidelines. If Karen pushed, Jane would have to comply, and if she resisted, it would be another mark against her. Things escalated quickly after that. Karen scheduled another meeting, this time with someone higher up in the agency. Jane couldn't refuse. She had to play along. But I could see the cracks forming. Her smile was tighter, her patience thinner. She was losing control, and she knew it. I wasn't free yet, but I had started the process, and Jane could feel it slipping away from her fingers. Jane was unraveling. I could see it in the way her smile had started to slip, in the way her fingers tightened around her coffee mug whenever I walked into the room. She had spent years perfecting the act, keeping her mask firmly in place, but now the cracks were showing. She knew I was getting out. Worse, she knew she was losing control over how it would happen. That scared her more than anything. The meeting with Karen and the agency supervisor was scheduled for the following week. Jane had no choice but to go along with it, to pretend she was a cooperative and supportive foster parent. But I wasn't naive. I knew she wouldn't just sit back and let me go without trying to ruin me first. She was already working on it, planting seeds of doubt, making sure that by the time I walked out of here, I'd be branded as the problem, the difficult one, the kid no one wanted to deal with. It started with little things. She would walk into a room just as I was leaving and sigh dramatically, shaking her head like she was dealing with something exhausting. If May was around, she'd mutter just loud enough to be heard, I don't know what else I can do. She just refuses to listen. Sometimes she would drop her voice even lower, as if she didn't want me to hear. I'm honestly worried. She's been acting so hostile lately. She was setting up a narrative. If I lost my temper, if I snapped at her, it would only confirm what she was telling them, that I was unstable, that I was a liar, that I couldn't be trusted. I gritted my teeth and forced myself to stay calm. Then the real hit came. 2 days before the meeting, I got a call from Karen. Her voice was careful, too careful. Jane reached out to us, she said. She's concerned about your behavior. She said you've been withdrawn, not engaging, and that she's worried you might not be in a good place emotionally. I felt cold. This was exactly what I had been afraid of. I'm fine, I said, my voice even. She's lying. Karen hesitated. She also mentioned an incident with May. She said you've been pressuring her, trying to turn her against Jane. I clenched my jaw. I should have seen this coming. Jane had realized I wasn't acting alone, that May had been helping me. She was trying to cut off my support, isolate me. If May backed away now, if she denied everything, then I'd be standing alone again. Did May say that? I asked. Karen paused. She didn't confirm it, but she didn't deny it either. I exhaled slowly. That was all Jane needed. The doubt was planted. If May stayed quiet during the meeting, if she refused to back me up, then Jane would win. I needed something stronger. That night, I went to May's room. She was sitting on her bed, scrolling through her phone, but the second she saw me, she tensed. I don't want to talk about it, she muttered. I stepped inside, shutting the door behind me. She got to you. She didn't have to, May said. I told you before. I don't want to get involved. She looked up, her expression conflicted. I don't want her to turn on me. She already has, I said. You think you're safe because you've been here longer? Because you've played by her rules? It doesn't matter. The second you're not useful to her anymore, she'll do to you what she's doing to me. May looked away. She knew I was right. Please, I said, softer now. I just need you to tell the truth. She didn't respond, but she didn't tell me no either. That was something. The next day, I made my final move. Jane kept all of her important papers in her office, neatly filed away in locked drawers. But not everything was under lock and key. Some things were just left sitting out, carelessly placed on her desk when she thought no one was looking. And Jane had gotten too comfortable, too used to people not questioning her. I waited until she was out on one of her errands, then I slipped into her office. Her desk was cluttered, covered in notes and letters from social workers, official documents, forms that she hadn't yet filed away. I scanned through them quickly, looking for anything useful, and then I found it, a handwritten note in the margin of one of her reports, a single sentence, scrawled in her neat, practiced handwriting. She won't be my problem for much longer. I stared at it, my heart pounding. It wasn't much, but it was enough to show what she really thought of me. Enough to prove that she had never cared, that everything she had done was just about control. I took a picture. Then I walked out of the office, feeling lighter than I had in months. The day of the meeting, Jane was perfect. She smiled warmly, spoke in her calm, patient voice, making herself sound like a saint for dealing with such a troubled child. She told them how much she had tried to support me, how much she cared, how she only wanted what was best. Then Karen turned to me. Do you have anything you'd like to say? I looked at Jane. She was watching me carefully, waiting for me to mess up, waiting for me to lash out and prove her right. Instead, I pulled out my phone and slid it across the table. I think you should see this. Karen picked it up, reading the screen. Her face hardened. Then she passed it to the supervisor. Jane's smile faltered. What is this? The supervisor asked. I leaned back in my chair. It's Jane. The real Jane. Silence. For the first time, Jane had nothing to say. Jane tried to recover, but it was too late. The silence in the room stretched, heavy and unbreakable. The supervisor read the note again, then set my phone down with a measured breath. Jane, she said slowly, would you like to explain this? Jane let out a short, breathy laugh, the kind people give when they're trying to downplay something that can't be downplayed. Oh, come on. That's nothing. Just a personal note taken out of context. She straightened in her seat, slipping back into her usual composure. You know how stressful fostering can be. I was venting. That's all. The supervisor's expression didn't change. Neither did Karen's. "This isn't venting," Karen said, her voice sharper than I'd ever heard it. "This is a direct admission that you were planning to get rid of her. And that's just the part we have in writing. I have to wonder what else has been going on in this house that we haven't seen." Jane's mouth opened and closed, but for the first time she had no script, no carefully crafted excuse. She was flailing. May shifted in her seat. She hadn't said a word since the meeting started, but now she cleared her throat. "She talks about us like that all the time," she said, voice quiet but steady. "I didn't say anything before, but she does. She complains about us, about how much work we are. She doesn't care about either of us." Jane whipped her head toward her, eyes flashing with betrayal. "May!" May flinched but held her ground. "I'm not lying," she said. "You just don't like that someone finally said it." The supervisor nodded, making another note. "I think we've heard enough." She turned to me. "We'll be moving you as soon as possible. We'll find somewhere safer. Then," to Jane, her voice colder now, more formal, "there will be a full review of your status as a foster parent. You'll be contacted with further details." Jane didn't argue. She didn't lash out. She just sat there, her face unreadable, as if she had already begun calculating her next move. But this time, it wouldn't be enough. She had lost. I didn't say anything when I walked out of that room. I didn't look back when I packed my things or when I stepped outside for the last time. The weight on my chest was still there, but it felt different now. Lighter, freer. I wasn't stupid. I knew that wherever I was going next, it wouldn't be perfect. The system didn't work that way. But for the first time in a long time, I had done something that mattered. I had fought back. And Jane, for all her power, for all her control, couldn't stop me. That, at least, was enough.